Doug, that was pretty fast. Just an hour ago, we were saying we weren't sure if Viktor Orban was going to block this or not. Is this a big win for the EU?
Look, I don't want to be the doom and gloom monger, but I do think that we have to inject a slight note of caution here. I'm going to be the not so fast guy. What do I mean by that? Clearly, sure, it is a win on the surface for the EU. Last December, at a similar EU summit, Viktor Orban was the one-man roadblock. He prevented the EU from extending this desperately needed 50 billion euro aid package to Ukraine. It made big headlines at the time. And he has been sort of the roadblock all along. So just getting this aid through is a big deal. The fact that they've reached agreement, and the agreement specifically is that Hungary has agreed to drop its veto over funding to Ukraine. There had been that threat once again of Hungary being able to step in and defy, essentially, the collective will of the 26-member EU bloc, aside from Hungary. So in that sense, they managed to push it through. And reportedly, and I'm saying Politico, which has a lot of inside information about what goes on behind the scenes in the EU, they're reporting that this was pushed through thanks to closed-door meetings that the top EU leaders, the EU Council President, the EU Commission President, plus a closed-session meeting with the leaders of France, Germany, and Italy. They basically all, got Orban into a room and, we don't know, pushed him into the corner and basically said, you pass this or else. I mean, look, we don't know what happened there, but essentially there was a full-court press by the top EU leaders, which eventually also brought in the leaders of Poland, the Dutch Prime Minister as well, the Belgian Prime Minister. So you could see everyone sort of piling on Orban to get him to do this. So that's where the bad news is, right? The bad news is that this should never have actually been even an extraordinary summit. This should not have been necessary, this summit. It still shows the outsized influence that Viktor Orban, the right-wing Prime Minister of Hungary, has had over the EU over the past 14 years since he came to power in Hungary at the head of his Fidesz party. So he's still an outsized influence. He still is a thorn in the side of the EU. In this case, they overcame, and we'll have to see the fine print. Are there going to be yearly reviews, and will Viktor Orban have perhaps more influence and be able to, in some form, veto, perhaps, the renewing of this aid? But this seems to be a 4-year deal, and it seems to be, and I have to underline, seems to be something that Viktor Orban has acquiesced to. That is, he is not going to stand in the way next year, the year after, of this continued, as Charles Michel, the EU Council President, put it, steadfast, long-term, predictable funding for Ukraine.
And 50 billion euros is a lot of money. What will it mean for Ukraine?
Well, it's a lot of money, Jeannie, but guess what? Probably isn't enough. And that's not me saying it. That is a lot of military experts. That is a lot of politicians on both sides of the Atlantic, especially in the United States. At the end of the day, this is great news. Yes, they needed this. But this was not even sort of an option. Europe desperately needed to pass this aid in order to send a signal to Washington, because this is essentially what it's doing. It's not just saying to Ukraine, as we say, we put our money where our mouth is. We are here with you for as long as it takes. So yes, there's that signal to Kiev, to Volodymyr Zelensky, to everyone watching closely in Kiev. But more importantly, it's a shot across the Atlantic where Congress, the Republican Congress House, is basically stalling, hemming and hawing, refusing to pass that Ukraine aid, demanding domestic issues, tighter border security, immigrant controls, all of that. So it's basically saying to the U.S., we're here. We are giving the money to Ukraine. Please follow our lead. Do the same, because without the U.S. aid, the 50 billion euros from Europe, while it's a lot, which it will help Ukraine with its budget, with a lot of its military funding, it will not do the job. So this is hopefully going to be an incentive, perhaps, at least from the EU and Ukraine's perspective, a strong incentive. Okay, Europe's doing it. Let's fall into place. It will put extra pressure on the Republicans in Congress, a party controlled by its MAGA base right now that is reluctant to give Ukraine more funding. It will now give them pause, perhaps, in an election year in the United States to rethink. The U.S. perhaps doesn't want to look like the lone holdout when you do have the EU stepping up for as long as it takes.
All right, Doug, thanks for that. France 24's Doug Herbert.